Imagine a world where April 15th, 1912 passed like any other spring morning. No newspaper headlines, no shock telegrams, no iceberg. The Titanic sails calmly into New York Harbor, cheered by thousands. History moves on, but history doesn't move on unchanged. Because if Titanic hadn't sunk, the ripple effects would reach far beyond the Atlantic. This is the story of what didn't happen and what could have. Without the disaster, Titanic would have stood as a beacon of human achievement, a floating celebration of the industrial age. Its arrival in New York would reinforce the idea that technology had conquered nature. That's not a small deal. In the early 20th century, confidence in human progress was sky high. People believed machines, empires, and ambition could solve anything. The Titanic's survival would supercharge that mindset. Arrogance becomes policy. The myth of human infallibility lasts longer, possibly too long. Instead of humility, there's hubris. And that changes how we respond to future crises. In our world, Titanic forced governments to act. Maritime safety regulations, international ice patrols, required lifeboats, even better wireless communication. But if the Titanic completes its voyage uneventfully, none of that urgency exists. We don't get safety regulations until a later disaster. Maybe the Lusitania, maybe something worse, but eventually tragedy strikes. And it may claim more lives than Titanic ever did. Because the lesson wasn't learned early, it's possible the cost of Titanic's survival is that some other ship, later on, takes its place on the front pages, only with more modern consequences. One of the unspoken effects of the Titanic disaster was its impact on public confidence. People suddenly became aware that even the biggest, most luxurious machines could fail. That fear created space for new ideas, like aviation. In our world, early air travel was dangerous and experimental, but the ocean no longer felt safe, so investment slowly shifted toward the skies. Now imagine a world where steamships still feel like the gold standard. Titanic-style luxury liners dominate long-distance travel well into the 1930s and 40s. Commercial aviation stalls. There's no race for altitude, no fast-track development of transatlantic flight. The first passenger jets arrive later. The world stays slower, more connected by sea than by sky. In this timeline, air travel doesn't become mainstream until the 1960s, or even 70s. Globalization is delayed. Cheap flights don't revolutionize business or tourism. A Titanic world is one of floating palaces, not airborne networks. Titanic carried more than luxury. It carried dreams, especially in third class. In our history, many immigrants perished in the sinking. Their stories were lost, along with potential contributions to American culture, business, and politics. But in this alternate timeline, those immigrants arrive safely. Thousands of lives unfold differently. Some go on to start families, open businesses, shape cities. The demographics of America shift, just slightly, but significantly. Neighborhoods look different, names in history books change. The ripple of a few hundred people arriving or not arriving can echo for generations. Maybe there's a Senator O'Connor from Steerage. Maybe a future tech giant's grandmother came over on the Titanic. Maybe jazz sounds a little different. The future becomes untraceably, but undeniably, new. Let's go macro. The Titanic sinking delivered a psychological blow. It reminded the world that progress had limits. It happened just 2 years before World War I, a war that would obliterate the optimism of the 19th century. Now imagine the Titanic doesn't sink. There's no check on that optimism. The belief that industrial power could only bring good continues unchecked. That could mean even faster militarization, a more confident, more reckless Europe, more dreadnoughts, more rail networks mobilized for war, less hesitation, and when war does come, it might be even bloodier. Because nations believe they can engineer their way to victory. Worse, the war might last longer. Leaders convinced of their own technological superiority may refuse to compromise. Instead of 4 years, the war drags into the 1920s. The human cost grows, the map of Europe looks different, and so does the peace that follows, if peace even comes. The Titanic was one of the first disasters to be covered on a truly global scale. Rich passengers like Astor and Guggenheim became headline names, dead or alive. Public fascination with the lives and deaths of the elite intensified. Now imagine that didn't happen. In a world where Titanic lands safely, the passengers disembark to applause, not mourning. Their stories are forgotten. There's no myth, no obsession, no legacy. The template for how we treat fame, especially tragedy-based fame, might develop differently. maybe slower, maybe less morbid. Without Titanic, we lose one of the first cases of media-driven public grief. That changes how future events, from Amelia Earhart to Princess Diana, play out in the public consciousness. Every culture has a story it tells about hubris. For modern Western civilization, the Titanic was that story. It was the floating Tower of Babel, a warning against arrogance, a tragedy that forced a generation to pause and reflect. But in this alternate history, that warning never arrives. No one learns. The myth never forms. Titanic becomes a triumph of engineering instead of a cautionary tale, and we lose a collective metaphor, one that shaped public thinking for decades. The phrase unsinkable might still exist, but without irony. The world walks a little taller, maybe too tall, and we all know what happens when humans forget how to be afraid of failure. What's eerie about this timeline is how much doesn't happen. No reforms, no modernism, no global obsession, no aviation boom, no pop culture myth. The Titanic didn't just sink a ship, it shifted history. By not sinking, it would have let the world drift a little longer in overconfidence. And sometimes it's the disasters we survive that teach us how not to repeat them. So what if Titanic never sank? Maybe the 20th century would have looked a little grander, but also maybe a little more dangerous. Thanks for watching. If you enjoy alternate timelines and historical what-ifs, don't forget to subscribe, because in this timeline, we're just getting started.